Ned Gillette was born on May 5, 1945, in the town of Barr in the U.S. state of Vermont. At an early age, Ned's parents introduced him to cross-country skiing, and Ned was a natural and had, by all accounts, developed into a highly proficient skier by age 5. Ned's talent was fostered by his parents, who would continuously encourage and support Ned's outdoor activities, and his love of spending time in the outdoors would only continue to grow throughout his formative years. After completing high school, Ned would enroll at the prestigious Dartmouth College in the neighboring state of New Hampshire, and would naturally seek to join Dartmouth's cross-country ski team. Ned's high level of skiing ability easily landed him a spot on the team, and soon after, he was named captain of the team. In the year 1967, Ned would begin to etch his legacy into the history books, winning the title of college cross-country ski champion that year. The following year in 1968, Ned was named to the U.S. Olympic ski team for that year's games in the French city of Grenoble. However, he would participate as a reserve member of the team and did not race in any races during the games. Ned would continue to participate as a member of the U.S. cross-country ski team, this time as a member of the A team in 1969 as well. In 1970, Ned enrolled at the University of Colorado in the school's MBA program and would stay enrolled in the program for exactly 1 day before eschewing the idea in favor of his more adventurous ambitions, and packed his things, heading west to Yosemite National Park, a favorite destination for wandering young outdoor adventurers like himself. And not long after arriving, he would help establish the cross-country ski school within the park, and would make a modest living for himself running the park ski school during the wintertime, while simultaneously basking in the outdoor splendor of Yosemite National Park and the many potential adventures contained within it over the next few years. However, after a few years spent in Yosemite, Ned's adventurous ambitions would begin to draw him away from Yosemite in pursuit of other adventures across the globe. In 1972, Ned would embark on his first expedition trip, following 300 miles of proposed oil pipelines in the Brooks Range in Alaska, accompanied by 3 other teammates. The expedition was a success and proved to be a highly invigorating and inspiring trip for Ned, who would begin to dream of one day mounting his own adventure expedition, and was soon saving up his money to do just that. A few years later, in 1977, Ned had finally had the time to plan out an expedition of his own, and enough time to save up enough money to fund his trip, and led an expedition team consisting of himself and 3 other team members on a 500-mile ski expedition up the Canadian Robson Channel and around Ellesmere Island, with the team utilizing custom, purpose-built sleds for the journey. Much like another mountaineer from the U.S. Northeast I covered on the channel before, John Waterman, after visiting and adventuring in and around Alaska for the first time, Ned fell in love with Alaska and planned to return for another adventure in the state as soon as possible. He would do just that the following year in 1978, where he and climber Jalen Rowell made the first single-day ascent of the highest mountain in North America, the 20,310-foot-high Denali, otherwise known as Mount McKinley. This was a major accomplishment at the time, as the late 1970s and the early to mid-1980s were a highly competitive period of time in Denali's mountaineering history that would attract many high-level climbers seeking to check off first ascents of the peak, such as NAOMI UEMURA, the climber who was the topic of the very first video I made on the channel, who mysteriously disappeared after he had seemingly made the first successful winter solo ascent of the peak just a few years after Ned's 1978 ascent in the year 1984, as well as the aforementioned and deeply troubled mountaineer John Waterman, who would make his final journey to the peak in 1981, tragically in an obvious and unfortunately successful effort to end his own life. Following his monumental single-day ascent of Denali, Ned would almost immediately begin planning and saving up for his next adventurous outing, which would take place the next year as he led an expedition team to the Southern Alps, which is located in the country of New Zealand. The following year in 1980, he would complete the first American ascent of the 24,757-foot high Chinese peak named Mus Tagata, and following this ascent, he would make a ski descent of the peak, which was the first ski descent of a peak over 7,000 meters in height. That same year, he would also make his first visit to the breathtaking Karakoram Range in northern Pakistan, which is another frequently occurring locale in many of my previous videos, I might add. This 1980 expedition to the Karakoram Range again sparked a curiosity within Ned, and not long after departing from the Karakoram Range, he found himself now obsessed with high-altitude mountaineering and Himalayan mountaineering as a whole, and would go through great lengths to acquire sponsor funding for his next planned expedition to the region the following year in 1981. Ned was indeed able to secure the funding needed for this next planned expedition, where he, along with 5 friends, would complete a 300-mile circumnavigation of Mount Everest, followed by the first winter ascent of the 23,342-foot high peak, Pumori. However, amusingly, Ned would have to fly back to Las Vegas between his Everest circumnavigation and his ascent of Pumori to fulfill sponsor obligations at a trade show that was being hosted in the city. Throughout the mid-1980s, Ned continued his adventurous lifestyle, as he had used his boundless charisma to establish enough industry connections to continue to secure sponsorships to fund his endeavors, and was a frequent photographer and writer for Outside Magazine and National Geographic, among others. In the year 1988, Ned would embark on a new and perilous expedition, this time not on skis or with crampons attached to his feet, but rather aboard a 28-foot bright red rowboat named the Sea Tomato. In this 1988 excursion, Ned, along with 2 friends, would attempt to cross the Drake Passage, a notoriously foul stretch of seas separating the tip of South America from Antarctica, a region I covered extensively in my video a few weeks back. Ned and his 2 companions endured the freezing, choppy seas for 13 days. As he later recounted, quote, "We capsized 3 different times, and one of us went overboard each time," he said of the passage. The photos he took along the way and the full account of the team's experiences was later published by National Geographic in a feature article. It was shortly after this crossing of the Drake Passage in 1988 that Ned would meet a woman named Suzanne Patterson, a former U.S. Olympic skier and champion in both downhill and slalom skiing. The two hit it off immediately over their shared love of skiing, and 2 years later in 1990, the couple were married and took up residence in Sun Valley, Idaho. However, married life would not slow Ned's thirst for adventure, but fortunately, Suzanne was eager to tag along on his adventures, despite her relative inexperience, as she would later reminisce that before meeting Ned, she had never spent a night in a tent. In 1992, the couple set off on their next ambitious expedition, as they would be attempting a full traversal of the historic Silk Road, a journey of over 5,000 miles stretching across several countries. They would be attempting this journey in traditional merchant style, complete with 6 camels to accompany them along the way. This journey would be a long one, with numerous ups and downs along the way. However, ultimately, Ned and Suzanne would finally complete their arduous journey in 1993 successfully. However, after this expansive journey, Ned began to shift his outlook on his adventures, as he began to shift his plans from more ambitious, large-scale, and highly publicized adventures to smaller, more low-key, private excursions with Suzanne instead. In September of 1997, Ned and Suzanne would travel to the Gilgit-Baltistan region of Pakistan for their latest excursion, this time with the intention of trekking around the 26,660-foot high peak NANGA PARBAT, which I've covered in several of my previous videos. And after they had circled NANGA PARBAT, the couple planned to make an ascent and crossing of a 16,000-foot high mountain pass near Chogolungma. However, their plans to complete this journey were foiled by heavy snowfall, as they had arrived too late in the year to complete their planned trek. After returning to the United States for the wintertime the following summer in 1998, Ned and Suzanne would return to Pakistan to make another attempt at the trek, this time with the hopes of more favorable weather conditions. In July of 1998, Ned and Suzanne arrived in Pakistan and set off on their trek together, just the two of them, as Ned wanted to keep a low profile during their trip and avoided hiring any local porters or help to accompany them on their trip. The couple spent 6 days circling around NANGA PARBAT's mighty slopes, before they hired some locals to transport them to the village of Skardu, and from there, they hired more locals to transport them to the remote village of Doko, and began their 6-day journey across the 16,000-foot high mountain pass. As they were ascending the pass, Ned said to Suzanne, quote, "You know, Susie, a day hasn't gone by on this trip where one of us hasn't mentioned how lucky we are," he remarked. On August 4th, Ned and Suzanne reached the summit of the pass and began their descent into the lush valley below, and by that evening had finished descending the pass and set their camp for the night, eating a simple supper consisting of ramen noodles and oatmeal, spending some time together, enjoying one another's company in the moonlight before they settled into their tent for the night. In the early morning hours of August 5th, 1998, Suzanne was jolted awake by the sound of a shotgun blast, which ripped into the tent and into Ned, who remarked, My insides are whacked out. I think I'm dying," he muttered as he fell unconscious. A panicked Suzanne slapped and shook Ned in a frenzied effort to make him regain consciousness, which worked, as a hazy-eyed Ned snapped back to coherence and remarked, "We've got to get out of this tent. It's dangerous," he said. The couple were putting their boots on when another shotgun blast tore through the canvas of their tent, with the buckshot again striking Ned, and this time Suzanne as well. As Suzanne reeled from the force of the shot, Ned exclaimed, quote, "Oh my God, they got you too," as the couple bewilderedly stumbled out from inside the tent and took cover behind their packs. However, despite now being outside their tent in the pitch darkness, neither was able to see their assailant, and so the couple remained behind their packs for a few minutes, sitting still and remaining as silent as they could. After a few minutes had passed without further incident, Suzanne had begun to shiver due to the chilly nighttime air, and decided to return to the tent to curl up in the warmth of her sleeping bag. As she began to re-enter the tent, Ned saw a shadowy figure emerge from nearby the tent, clutching what appeared to be a rock in his hand. Despite his extensive injuries, Ned was thinking on his feet, and he too armed himself with a rock from the ground nearby and lunged at the shadowy figure. Ned's bold assault startled the man, who immediately fled away from the tent and back into the darkness of the night. After Ned stayed outside the tent for a while to ensure they had repelled their attackers, the couple huddled together in their tent, waiting out the rest of the night while comforting one another. However, by sunrise, neither were in any condition to leave to try and call for help, and so they waited for someone to come across them. A few hours after the sun had risen, the couple were discovered by a group of local men. Ned said to the men, quote, "We've been shot. Go get a phone and call for a rescue helicopter," he told them. The local men then discussed something for a few minutes before sending one man back into the valley. More than an hour after the man had departed, a local boy returned and informed Ned and Suzanne that despite their pleas for help, nobody had phoned for their rescue. Ned was furious at this revelation and grabbed a few wads of the local currency and handed them to the boy, again reiterating that they had been shot and needed someone to call for a helicopter to rescue them, and the boy nodded and set off into the valley below. Not long after the boy had departed from their campsite, as Ned and Suzanne huddled together in their tent, Ned began to grow weak, as his body began to shut down as a result of the extensive gunshot wounds he had suffered the night before. Suzanne recalled of his final moments of life, quote, "His breathing started getting labored. I felt his stomach. I could feel the wounds. His heart was erratic. I propped him up, cut his t-shirt off him, and he just closed his eyes. The whole tent floor was full of blood. There were down feathers everywhere. That was the first time I really saw the blood and the degree of the gunshot wounds and just how brutal and horrible it was," she recalled. Suzanne remained at the camp with the locals, who consoled her and kept her company while she awaited the help that Ned had called for. However, as the sun set on the evening of August 5th, there was no sign of rescue to be found, and Suzanne spent another long night at the campsite. The following morning on August 6th, approximately 36 hours after the shooting had taken place, worried about the extent of her injuries since the previous night, the locals that were staying at the campsite with Suzanne finally convinced her to allow them to take her into the village on a stretcher, and after a 4-hour journey, she was transported in a jeep to the city of Gilgit for medical treatment. Suzanne was admitted to the hospital with over 80 buckshot wounds scattered across her back and side, and after stabilizing her, she was then interviewed by local police about the incident. On August 8, 1998, two local 20-somethings, a man named Abid Hussein and a man named Nan Heschel, were arrested by police for the ruthless attack after they had confessed to the crime as a botched robbery attempt, and a shotgun was recovered by police from one of the men's homes. Furthermore, the men allegedly reenacted the events of the night of August 5th for a videotape. However, I couldn't find any trace of it online, so it has likely been lost or could have never existed in the first place. In the aftermath of the incident, the mountaineering and outdoor adventuring world was shocked and saddened by the news of Ned's murder. However, as the details of Ned and Suzanne's itinerary emerged to the public, some critics would question their plans to explore the region unaccompanied, as the Gilgit-Baltistan region is very remote and has had a tumultuous history peppered with violence. Furthermore, many outside observers condemn the locals for not calling for help when initially asked, or even the second time. However, Suzanne adamantly and passionately refuted this criticism, herself having nothing but praise for the locals, who she credited for ultimately saving her life. Ned's murder would go on to serve as a bleak reminder to tourists of the inherent risks of visiting the region. However, as many of my longtime viewers are aware, unfortunately, this would not be the final incident of violence towards foreigners that would take place in the region, as in 2013, a group of armed militants would storm the base camp of NANGA PARBAT, and in a hostage-taking mission gone wrong, would claim the lives of several people. Much like with this 2013 NANGA PARBAT base camp crisis, the fate of the two suspects arrested for Ned's death is unclear and pretty much undocumented at this point. as while they faced a potential punishment of hanging for the crime, whether the men's executions were actually carried out or not is unknown. In retrospect, after having observed how the events of the 2013 attack unfolded, there is even further doubt in my mind whether the two men were even responsible for the crime at all, or had just been conveniently framed for Ned's murder by police, as the police in Pakistan are known to use brute force to coerce false confessions out of suspects in order to quickly close cases. The memory of Ned Gillette lives on through the many people that had the pleasure of interacting with him and the multitude of people he impacted throughout the course of his life. He was inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame in the year 2000. Thank you all for watching.